The United States Public Health Service, as it exists today, is the product of experience extending over a period of nearly 150 years. It was originally created as the Marine Hospital Service for the purpose of providing medical care to American merchant seamen. The Marine Hospital Service was established by an act of Congress signed by the second President of the United States, John Adams, on July 16, 1798. This service was originally supported by a tax on American merchant seamen, but this tax was later abolished. The tax was collected by the Collector of the Customs of the Treasury Department, and the Marine Hospital Service came under the jurisdiction of that department, where it remains today. The first Marine Hospital, located at Norfolk, Virginia, was purchased from that state in 1801. The second was built in Boston, Massachusetts, and some of the medical personnel were utilized by both the Union and the Confederacy for the care of the sick and wounded of the military forces. It frequently happened that the medical officers of the early Marine hospitals were the first physicians to diagnose such diseases as cholera, fever, and smallpox, which seriously endangered the public health at ports of entry. As time went on, the work of the service became of such increasing importance to the public health of the country that Congress gradually extended its duties until it became in function a federal health service. Recognizing the value of mobility and military discipline in an organization which had to combat epidemic diseases, Congress authorized the organization of the Marine Hospital Service along military lines, with officers holding commissions in grades similar to those of officers of the medical departments of the Army and the Navy. In 1912, the name of the service was changed to that borne by this organization today, the United States Public Health Service. The Public Health Service is administered by the Surgeon General, who is responsible directly to the Secretary of the Treasury, to Congress, and to the President of the United States. We will now hear the Surgeon General briefly outline the work of the Public Health Service.
Although the first responsibility for public health rests upon the states and localities in our country, the federal government, through the Public Health Service, does much to prevent disease and to improve the health of all the people. This is done in many ways. One very skilled group of men and women of disease and means of preventing it. Other service officers guard the ports to prevent introduction of disease from abroad. Others have the duty of preventing and halting the spread of infections within our own territory. Under the provisions of the recently enacted Social Security Act, the Public Health Service is cooperating with every state and territory in the development in those states and territories of a national health program. This cooperative work between the federal, state, and local governments should provide new standards of health care for the people. In addition, the manufacture of all serums and vaccines sold in the country is carefully supervised by the Public Health Service. Studies are carried out concerning drug addiction and mental hygiene. It conducts marine hospitals in which are treated American sailors. In addition, the service keeps in constant touch with health conditions throughout the world through weekly reports from every consular officer. It encourages health education in various problems of disease prevention. In what follows, you will see in much more detail the ways in which this organization operates for human service.
For centuries, it has been well known that epidemic diseases follow the lines of commerce and travel. During colonial times and in the early days of our republic, the introduction of yellow fever, smallpox, cholera, and other diseases from foreign countries by ships was by no means uncommon. Epidemics of yellow fever from this source occurred as late as 1798 in New York, in Baltimore as late as 1832, and in Philadelphia as late as 1853. Many outbreaks of smallpox and cholera were the result of cases brought in by vessels. The danger of introduction of diseases from abroad has paralleled in growth the remarkable development of transportation on the sea, on the land, and in the air. The transportation of disease has been as much facilitated by improved mechanical methods as has the transportation of persons or property. Maritime quarantine was at first undertaken by the states and cities, but is now administered by the Public Health Service at all the ports of the United States and its possessions. To perform these functions, the service has been given quarantine jurisdiction over all ships and all persons, both citizens and aliens, coming into American ports from abroad. In its quarantine work, the United States Public Health Service maintains a fleet of trim and speedy boarding tugs, which carry the quarantine officers out to the vessels arriving at United States ports. When a vessel arrives at quarantine, the medical quarantine officer, a nurse, and an inspector go out to it in one of these boarding tugs so well known to seamen and ocean travelers. They draw alongside the vessel and go aboard. The quarantine officer meets the ship's doctor and the purser. The purser turns over to him certain records of the vessel's voyage for inspection, especially the bill of health and the health record en route, which shows all cases of illness occurring on board during the trip. The list here shows a suspicious case of illness in a member of the crew. Let's see now what happens. The quarantine officer is taken to the sick bay in the crew's quarters to examine the patient. His experience and training in the detection of the symptoms of rare as well as the common diseases tells him that this patient is suffering from typhus fever. He orders the patient to be removed from the vessel. And put aboard the quarantine tug to be taken ashore. All persons who have been in contact with the patient and thus have been exposed to the disease are also ordered on board the tug. The patient and the contacts are taken to the detention hospital, in this instance, Hoffman Island in New York Harbor. On their arrival, the sick patient is taken directly to the hospital. Here he is given appropriate treatment and cared for until he is recovered. Every facility is made available in such cases, both for the benefit of the patient himself and for the protection of others. As this happens to be a case of old world typhus fever, which is known to be spread by the body louse, the contacts, those who have had association with the patient during the voyage, are first taken to the delousing plant. Here they must remove all of their clothing. Thoroughly sprayed with soap and water. Next, they are sent under the showers. And finally, each one is sprayed with an insecticide that kills any lice or nits that may still remain in their hair. The clothing of these contacts is placed in net bags, and these bags are sent to the fumigating room. This clothing, together with the baggage of the contacts, is placed in fumigating chambers where it is thoroughly disinfested. If necessary, the contacts are isolated in the detention hospital for observation. Every precaution is taken by the quarantine officers to prevent the introduction of disease into the United States. When the quarantine work has been completed and the ship declared free from danger, the medical officers of the Public Health Service then turn to the inspection of immigrants. This scene shows the well-known immigration station at Ellis Island, New York. During the busy period of a few years ago, more prospective citizens of this country arriving from abroad entered through this world-renowned station than through any other port of the country. In past years, thousands of aliens arrived at Ellis Island daily, and each one had to undergo an examination at the hands of the medical officers of the Public Health Service. In past times, too, many of them arrived only to be turned back at our very gates because of mental or physical defects. This was a necessary but somewhat cruel procedure and caused many heartaches, untold hardships, and much unnecessary expense. To avoid this condition, a new system was inaugurated by international consent in 1925, since which year intending immigrants have been examined in foreign countries by Public Health Service officers who are assigned to American consulates for this purpose. The prospective immigrant makes application through the American consul, who, if the applicant comes within the quota prescribed by Congress, arranges for an examination by the Public Health Service medical officer. If the applicant passes these physical and mental tests successfully, there is little chance that he'll be refused admittance later. Among other old records, Webster's book on pestilence gives vivid descriptions of the many ravages of bubonic plague. This disease is constantly present in the Orient, and this fact makes it an ever-present threat to the United States and its possessions. The germ that causes bubonic plague is carried by fleas that live on rats and other rodents. Rats are great travelers, and vessels at wharves must use rat guards to keep them from coming aboard. Notice how this rat balances himself with his tail. Now he attempts to clear the rat guard. Will he succeed? It looks like he'll make it. No, he admits defeat, and he returns to the wharf. Yellow fever, the fearful yellow jack which once struck terror to the South, is one of the best examples of a dread disease now almost entirely wiped out by science. It is transmitted principally by a particular kind of mosquito. With the mosquitoes which transmit the disease exterminated, yellow fever is eliminated. Although yellow fever has been banished from our shores since 1905, it still exists in South America and Africa, and recent developments in air travel again make it a menace to the United States. To combat this menace, the yellow fever mosquito must be eliminated from ships and airplanes, and infected persons must be detected and isolated. Although the mosquitoes which spread yellow fever usually fly but a relatively short distance, they have been carried by airplanes for thousands of miles. It's only by the exercise of the utmost care and constant watchfulness that this dangerous, ever-threatening disease is kept outside our borders. When there arrives at a port of entry an airplane which might bring in the yellow fever mosquito, the passengers and crew are inspected for symptoms of the disease. An important part of the inspection is the taking of the temperature for evidence of fever. The plane is gone over thoroughly with a vacuum cleaner to recover any yellow fever mosquitoes that might be aboard. Then the cabin and all enclosed spaces in the plane are sprayed with insecticide that destroys these dangerous pests. The opening of air routes to the Orient has created serious problems in preventing the introduction of diseases, particularly cholera and smallpox, into Hawaii and the United States. When the country was small, travel was slow, and distances in travel time were much greater than they are today. then there was less need for action on the part of the federal government itself in preventing the spread of epidemics. But with the increased rapidity of travel, the expansion in territory, and the concentration of population, this work became important. With increase in interstate traffic, the need for uniform quarantine regulations became apparent, and by the consent of the states and under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, Congress provided for federal control of both interstate and international quarantine. The sanitary control over all water supplies used for drinking or culinary purposes on interstate carriers is one of the activities of the Public Health Service in connection with the prevention of the interstate spread of disease. It is obvious that this is a tremendous task. The water included in these supplies comes from almost 3,000 sources. In this work, the cooperation of the state and city health authorities is given to the Public Health Service. In taking supplies of drinking and culinary water on board vessels, connections are made direct to the supply pipes, and the possibility of contamination of the water during this process is thereby reduced to a minimum. Here we see a supply of drinking water being taken aboard a steamship at one of our ports. The same sanitary precautions are carried out when drinking water is taken aboard trains. Frequent inspections are made of this procedure. The passenger can therefore feel a sense of security when he quenches his thirst from the water cooler or drinks water with his meals in the dining car. The fight against bubonic plague is a fight against the rat. He must be trapped, poisoned, starved out, built out. Everything must be done to rout this animal. The rat has been called man's most destructive and dangerous enemy. He is certainly a most dangerous pest in the case of bubonic plague. He is sturdy, furtive, and crafty, and he readily matches his cunning against that of his enemies. The rat catcher must know the habits of this animal, and it is only with such knowledge, combined with actual experience, that he can qualify as an expert in what may indeed be called a specialized field. The rats are tagged to show the locality in which they are caught, and are then sent to the laboratory for examination. Some of the rats that are taken alive are put into bags to preserve for identification and examination any fleas that they may harbor. Here we see a sample day's catch of rats in one of our large cities. At the laboratory, the rats are combed for fleas, and their fleas are collected for study and for testing to determine whether or not they are infected with bubonic plague. In certain western states, plague has spread from rats to ground squirrels, and the fight against these animals is being constantly carried on there. The following are typical scenes of the regions in the east-central sections of this country in which trachoma is chiefly found. In these rural sections, life was somewhat primitive, and the sanitary conditions were conducive to the spread of the disease because of the habits and customs of the people. They did not know that trachoma was spread by means of the hands and by towels and handkerchiefs and other articles which may carry the discharges from the eyes. Simply described, trachoma is a chronic infectious disease of the lining membrane of the eyelids. If the lids are turned back, a number of small granular bodies resembling sago grains will be noticed. The disease produces a roughened condition of the inside of the lid, which irritates the front of the eyeball, causing an inflammation, which often leads to blindness. For many years, the Public Health Service has conducted a campaign against this ancient disease. As early as 1912, Dr. John McMullen of the Public Health Service was sent to Kentucky to make a survey of the situation there. Dr. McMullen, what was found in Kentucky and what was done there?
Well, more than 18,000 persons were examined in 1912,
and between 7 and 8% were found to have trachoma. Many had already been blinded by the disease, and many others remained in dark rooms, shielding their eyes with their arms. Some had not seen light for months, while many cases had existed for years. In checking up some years later, the changes were remarkable. Instead of many sore-eyed people and the almost universal practice of wearing colored glasses observed during the first survey, scarcely colored glass was seen in few cases of active trachoma. From the standpoint of humane and economic considerations, there is no way to estimate what this trachoma work has been worth. Much of the work was done in mountain regions, where roads even now are not good. Usually medical officers travel by horseback, and often they had to walk. The work has now been turned over to the states.
Instead of painful and sightless eyes to destroy the joys of youth, we now have the precious gift of sight. The future must be drear to one destined to live in darkness. Fortunately, this boy was discovered in time. Instead of blindness added to other infirmities of old age, we have the ability to assume an economic role in family affairs. Numerous outbreaks of typhoid fever have followed the use of shellfish grown in contaminated waters. This was a danger that could be combated by examination of the waters where oysters were grown, and forbidding the interstate shipment of oysters originating in areas the sanitary conditions of which were not approved by the Public Health Service. Because oysters from beds in contaminated waters will not be certified, and shucking plants and canneries are required to be conducted under proper sanitary conditions, the consumer can now enjoy this seafood with a greater sense of security than formerly. An act of Congress authorizes an annual conference between the Surgeon General and the state health officers to discuss important health matters. Here the Surgeon General opens a recent conference.
This annual conference of state and territorial health officers will come to order. I am delighted to greet you here today. One of the most significant events in public health which has occurred in our lifetime transpired last month when President Roosevelt signed the bill appropriating funds to launch the Health Security Program. This bill and the funds authorized under it offer a great promise to the people of this country for better health. It is your task and my task to see that this promise becomes a realization. It is to discuss the detailed means by which we may attain the objectives held forth in the Social Security Act that this conference will be concerned. I welcome your advice.
These conferences provide opportunities for planning effective methods of state and federal cooperation in attacking health problems of mutual concern. For many years, the Public Health Service has cooperated with the state health officers in an effort to develop and improve state and local health work. When necessary, experienced service officers are assigned, as shown here, for periods of time to aid state and local health departments in their special health problems. Funds made available by Congress have been matched by state and local agencies and used to develop local health services. Under the Social Security Act, provisions for this cooperative aid to these health services have been greatly extended. The city health officer of a western city receives a telephone call. He picks up the receiver and finds that it's from a local physician. This physician has a case the symptoms of which resemble epidemic encephalitis, but there are some features which make this diagnosis uncertain. The city health officer remarks that he is greatly concerned, as he has had several similar cases reported in the past few days.